Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Extinction on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. For performance monitoring, I'll be using CAM. If you want to download the software, there's a link down in the description. So Extinction, I'll be doing 1080p, 900p, 1440p and 4K. To skip none of those sections of the video, check the description below. First I'll show you the G4560 on 1080p, targeting 60 frames per second. This game seems to be GPU bound, that's why you won't see much of a difference between the G4560 and Ryzen 3 1200. I mostly notice the difference using a GTX 1060, pretty much when getting over 90 frames per second. Targeting 60 is usually just fine for these CPUs. Then I show you the same configuration but on the Ryzen 3 1200 with a 3.9 GHz overclock. It's just 1080p with FXAA, with foliage and shadows lowered from ultra to high, and that's enough to be pretty much over 50 frames per second all the time. Then I just crank up the settings to the maximum to see what frame rate we get, and we're usually getting some drops into the 40s in the worst case scenario, because for example one of the biggest enemies in the game is destroying a building, plus a lot of foliage, all that kind of stuff. Then I lower the resolution to 900p, showing you the maximum settings, and that's enough to be pretty much over 60 frames per second. Then I switch to 1440p and I show you ultra settings without anti-aliasing or motion blur, and that's enough to be over 30 frames per second. And then I lower the settings to the minimum to see what frame rate we get, and so far the game looks significantly flatter, but it feels way smoother, so you have a choice there. And finally at 4K I show you the lowest settings, and unfortunately we're unable to maintain 30 frames per second all the time. It tends to drop below 30 in very crucial moments, so I don't recommend 4K unless you are willing to overclock your GTX 1050 Ti. It won't be perfect, it will still drop below 30, but you still have the choice there if you want it. Personally, I would just stay at 1080p Ultra or 1080p on a mix between high and ultra to get a smoother frame rate. But now I'm going to talk to you about the options menu and my experience testing this game. It has very limited options so far, but at least it has something. So to get the best performance, first lower shadows, then lower foliage, and finally anti-aliasing. Those are the three options that gave me the biggest difference in performance, especially shadows and foliage. I recommend lowering those in groups. On the anti-aliasing option we have FXAA, TAA and off. Of course if you turn it off, it gives you the bigger FPS boost. You can also cap the frame rate or uncap it. I kept it uncapped for this video. You can also turn off shadows if you want. The game looks significantly flatter without them as usual. And on the foliage option, if you put it on low, it gets rid of all the grass on screen pretty much. Instead of being grass that you can actually see, it just becomes a flat texture on the ground. So keep that in mind. If you want to have any sort of actual grass, keep foliage on medium. And overall I don't really like motion blur, but on this game it seems to be well done. It didn't bother me like on other games. But yeah, not much else to say about the options menu unfortunately. But with the game itself I didn't have much of a problem with the performance. On a 1050 Ti I can max it out on 1080p and have between 40 and 60 frames per second pretty much. Usually the drops happen when there's a lot of foliage on screen, plus trees plus enemies. So when I'm attacking an enemy for example and there's blood splatter all over the place, it's usually when the frame rate suffers the most. Same happens with the biggest enemies in the game. When you're just trying to cut a limb or something like that and there's a lot of foliage close by being displayed by the camera, that's usually when the biggest performance hit happens, or when one of those big enemies just destroys a lot of buildings. Those effects are usually the reason for the performance hit, that including the foliage at the same time. Not really a big problem if you ask me, but you can manage it quite well by lowering shadows and foliage a little bit. I wish there was an option to just lower the effects quality, that will help a lot with those drops, but unfortunately there isn't in the options menu, at least not right now. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video, thanks for watching and see you next time.